Hello, Jason. It's Friday, May 9th, and I want you to prepare yourself and know that what happens next is your own fault. You've asked someone with an English degree who hasn't taken math in over a decade to describe a geometric sequence, which I believe would be equivalent to me asking you a riddle in German and asking you to answer it in Italian. I just don't know the language for describing this stuff. But nonetheless, I'll give it a shot. Here we go. So the first part of your request was that I solve the first 3 digits in a geometric sequence. But before I do that, it's probably best that I understand what a geometric sequence is in the first place. As I understand it, it's a series of numbers with a common ratio between each successive number. For example, you could have a geometric sequence of 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, where each successive number is the previous number multiplied by 2. But in the case of your question, we aren't given the numbers in the sequence. We're only given certain information regarding how the numbers would interact in certain situations. For example, we know that the first number plus the second number plus the third number equals 13, and that the first number times the second number times the third number is 27. So when we write down the information that we already know, we end up with something like this. x1 plus x2 plus x3 equals 13. And x1 times x2 times x3 equals 27. Now, luckily for me, someone who's relatively unversed in the descriptive language of mathematics, you chose a pretty easy to understand sequence of numbers. And for me, the easiest way to figure out was this number, 27, which I know is a cube number, which comes in handy. And so, through nothing more than an informed guess, I figured out that the sequence that you're looking for is 1, 3, 9, so on. And so just to verify that these are in fact the numbers we're looking for, let's plug them into the equations. As we can see, x1, 1, x2, 3, and x3, 9, equal 13. And the same follows for 1 times 3 times 9 equals 27. So we have found a set of numbers that works. And it was essentially at this point that my ability to describe mathematics ran out, and so I looked up how to describe this equation. And I was told that any geometric sequence can be described with the following formula. xn equals a, where a is the first number in the sequence, r, where r is the ratio between numbers, to the power of n minus 1. And using this equation, you can come up with any term within a specific sequence. So let's test it out on the sequence you gave me and find, say, the 12th term. What we end up with is x12 equals 1 times 3 to the power of 12 minus 1. Or the 12th number in the sequence equals 3 to the power of 11, which comes to 177,147. Very little of this information, though, is actually useful for solving the problem that you actually gave me. It was only because of my fluke understanding that 27 was a cube number in a 3-number sequence that I was able to solve it in the first place. For example, if you had told me that the sum of the first 3 digits was 63 and the product was 1,278, I wouldn't have any clue how to go about finding the numbers. So maybe you can take that as an example to teach me. Then I'll be a super genius. And now, to get away from math a little bit, let's talk about today's Badass Mother Friday. Considering my own mathematical inadequacies, perhaps I should go with someone who, quite frankly, is a badass of math. And today, that somebody is going to be Sir Isaac Newton. But first, let me point out a very commonly held misconception. Sir Isaac Newton did not discover gravity. In actuality, people had been clinging to the surface of the Earth and wondering why that was for centuries, if not millennia, before Isaac Newton was even born. What Newton did do was describe the way that gravity interacts between 2 different objects. And this is where he becomes a badass. If you've already seen the episode of Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, that deals with this, then this is going to be a little bit boring for you. But essentially, the story goes like this. Edmund Halley was looking for a way to describe the relationship between the moon and the Earth in terms that could be mathematically quantified. Specifically, he wanted to know how the moon could stay in orbit around the Earth without being pulled in by its gravity, and to find his answer, he went to Cambridge to a mathematical recluse named Sir Isaac Newton. But first, him and a number of his contemporaries tried to figure out on their own, and couldn't come anywhere close, so it was shocking when he arrived at Cambridge and Newton said, "Oh, I already done that. I did it like a couple of years ago." And what's more, when mathematically describing the laws of geometry and motion, Newton had invented an entirely new field of mathematics, what we now call calculus. But none of this had seen the light of day because Newton had a high-profile feud with a man named Robert Hooke. Luckily, with Halley's help, he was encouraged to release the information that he had created and discovered, and became one of the biggest names in mathematics, physics, and a number of other fields. In fact, I would venture to say that anyone in the developed world should know who Isaac Newton is, and if they don't, then that's a failure of their education system. I would say he's probably in the top 10 people that you should know about if you want to be a citizen of the planet Earth. And now onto some minor challenge progress. I finished reading Shop Girl by Steve Martin, and I was actually pleasantly surprised. As a general rule, creative fiction written by people who are known for something else is usually lackluster. But Steve Martin proves not only that he has a verbose vocabulary, but also that he's capable of understanding literary techniques and developing a very interesting story. In fact, of the 19 books I've read so far this year, I'd have to say that this is probably third or maybe even second most interesting in terms of its style. Having said that, this book definitely deals with some very explicit content. If you're faint of heart, it's probably not for you. It recounts the tragic relationship between 50-year-old Ray Parker and 20-something-year-old Mirabelle. What I loved about the novella is that it doesn't necessarily just give you one point of view. While a conversation is happening, Steve Martin manages to narrate the inner thoughts of both sides. And the way that he sort of contrasts internal dialogues keeps it from becoming necessarily confusing. And so what we end up seeing is a tragedy in motion. We know from the beginning that this isn't going to work out because the characters have been thinking completely different thoughts about the same information the whole time. And rather than being left at the end thinking, what went wrong, what happened, we know what went wrong, and for some reason that seems more satisfying to me than the typical type of tragedy that you see these days. For the scores, without much justification, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 for entertainment and a 3 out of 5 for literary value. With that added caveat that this book probably isn't for everyone. Moving forward, I've started reading my biography for the month, which, following suit with a lot of the biographies I've read so far, isn't strictly speaking a biography. And the book is Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. I have to say I'm about 15 pages in, and it's really caught my interest so far. So I'll keep you updated as I make progress in that. Now, moving on to Battleship. Having trouble finding my fleet? I feel bad for you, son. I got 99 problems, but you missed at A1. And I'm going to go ahead and attack D8.